Good afternoon, Counseling 501 students. I want to begin this video by stating that any resources I mentioned throughout of it will be included in APA reference, probably underneath of the forum that the video is embedded in. Now, to get started with this assignment, I did some research within the state of West Virginia just to see if I could find any downloadable consent forms for counseling in this state. I felt like it would be more relevant to use one locally. And I did find one. It's a practice out of Charleston, West Virginia. It's called the Counseling Connection. Now, I downloaded their informed consent form and I compared that to the ACA Code of Ethics. And in doing so, I learned a lot, actually. I learned that those ethics that the ACA outlines in section A2 under informed consent and the counseling relationship are recommendations rather than mandated things that have to be included. And the reason that I say this is I found that among different informed consent forms in various states that I had looked at, a lot of them are missing pieces from the ACA Code of Ethics, the 2014 revised edition. And one of the most common missing parts of it that I found is the one that deals with what happens if your counselor dies. You know, what happens if they're incapacitated? Where does that leave the client? Now, this was no different in the Counseling Connection. However, I did call the Counseling Connection and ask them, do you have a policy regarding what happens if the therapist or counselor dies in the counseling relationship with the client? Now, the receptionist that I talked to did not have an answer for that, and I explained to her why I was asking. And she was very nice and come back and was like, let me have you talk to the clinical director who could probably answer that question. So then I spoke with the clinical director. Now, although they don't have what happens outlined in their informed consent, they do have a policy regarding how to handle that. And that is that if you're in a relationship with a counselor and the counselor is incapacitated or death, then they offer you a grief therapist to get past that, should you take that. And furthermore, after that, or whether you deny those services, then they offer a replacement therapist. Now, these are things that you could choose to leave the practice. Obviously, if you had a good relationship with that counselor and don't see yourself forming one with another one in the practice, they will provide a referral. But I just wanted to touch on that because I did watch some other videos on here where a lot of the informed consents were missing that part of it. Now, I found in this one, it did a generally good job at outlining the rest of them. It did speak about confidentiality. It spoke about the roles of counseling. It spoke about the outcomes. And also talked a lot about the billing process and reasons for termination should that occur. It outlined reasons why the client and the counselor may want to terminate services. It also told reasons why confidentiality would be breached, and it outlined those very specifically, and I think that's important for the client. So my reaction to the overall consent form is that it was well laid out, and it did include many things that were important, and it only lacked just a few things. But after speaking to the clinical director there, I even mentioned to them, is this something that you may want to put in your informed consent form in the future? And I guess they hadn't really talked about that, or just the person I spoke to hadn't. And they agreed that that could be something important for a client to know. It's often not addressed until the situation arises where this gives them something like a heads up, like, hey, this is what's going to happen should that happen. But I do think that that's important, and maybe that will address some of my fellow students who thought the same thing when looking over consent forms and not finding that information from the ACA Code of Ethics. As far as how it matched up with the West Virginia state legislation laws, I did find that it aligns with those. I didn't see any breach there, so everything's good. And basically, the West Virginia laws do follow the Code of Ethics pretty strictly, so there wasn't any discrepancy between them. But overall, I think that the Counseling Connection informed consent form is very informative, and I believe that it does align with the ACA Code of Ethics. Thank you.